Before Crouching Tiger, before Ip Man, before Jet Li became a global legend, there was Shaolin Temple, 1982. The film that not only launched Jet Li's career but also revived an entire martial arts culture. This wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural earthquake. 10. Jet Li was only 18 when he filmed it. Imagine being just 18, standing inside the ancient Shaolin Temple, the real one, not a movie set, surrounded by monks, soldiers, and film cameras for the very first time. That was Jet Li in 1982. Before this movie, he wasn't an actor at all. He was a national Wushu champion, a teenage martial arts prodigy trained by China's top sports institutions. He had never acted in front of a camera, but when the Beijing film studio searched for someone who could perform authentic Wushu with both power and grace, Jet Li was the perfect fit. His real name, Li Lianjie, was already known in China's sports circles, but the film turned him into a household name overnight. The director, Chang Xin-yen, saw something in Li that others didn't, an intensity that went beyond physical movement. He wasn't just performing martial arts, he was embodying them. What made his performance revolutionary was authenticity. Every punch, every leap, every kick you see in Shaolin Temple is real Wushu. No wire work, no camera tricks, no CGI. Jet Li performed his stunts himself, sometimes dozens of takes under freezing weather in Henan province. The discipline from his years of national training made him unstoppable. By the time the film was released, audiences were stunned. For the first time, Chinese viewers saw a young, real martial artist on screen, not just a trained actor faking it. Jet Li became a symbol of modern Chinese heroism, a bridge between the old Shaolin spirit and the new generation's pride. It was the birth of a legend, captured on film before he even knew what fame was. 9. The movie was filmed at the real Shaolin Temple, yes, the actual Shaolin Temple in Dengfeng, Henan, the sacred birthplace of Chinese Zen Buddhism and martial arts. When filming began in the early 1980s, the temple was in ruins. The Cultural Revolution had left it abandoned and damaged. No one had ever been allowed to shoot a movie there before. But this film changed that forever. The government granted special permission for the production, partly to promote tourism and national pride. Monks and locals participated in the filming, rebuilding parts of the temple with their own hands. The film crew lived in the area for months, facing freezing winters and muddy conditions. There was no heating, no luxury trailers, and minimal electricity. Actors and crew often ate simple steamed buns and slept on wooden boards. But it was that realism, the harsh, raw beauty of the real Shaolin, that made the movie unforgettable. Every frame feels alive with authenticity. You can almost smell the incense, feel the ancient stones, and sense the weight of centuries of martial tradition. The movie didn't just showcase the temple, it revived it. After the release, tourism to Shaolin exploded. Thousands of visitors poured in to see the place where the film had been made. The once-forgotten monastery became a global icon. Even the monks credited Shaolin Temple for saving their heritage. Think about that for a moment. One film not only made Jet Li a superstar, it resurrected the very birthplace of Kung Fu. That's the kind of impact most movies can only dream of. By the end of 1982, Shaolin Temple had already broken box office records across China, Hong Kong, and even Southeast Asia. But the story behind it was just beginning. Jet Li was about to go from local champion to international phenomenon, and the Shaolin Temple would never again be just a quiet mountain monastery. It had become a symbol of Chinese identity and cinematic pride. 8. It was the first movie shot in mainland China. After the Cultural Revolution, to understand how groundbreaking Shaolin Temple really was, you have to picture China in the early 1980s. The Cultural Revolution had just ended a few years earlier, and the country was only starting to reopen to art, culture, and entertainment. For nearly a decade, films were either banned or heavily censored. The idea of making a movie about monks, martial arts, and rebellion against imperial power would have been unthinkable. But Shaolin Temple changed everything. It was the first major martial arts film shot entirely in mainland China after that long, silent period. It marked a cultural rebirth. For the first time in years, Chinese audiences could watch a story filled with energy, heroism, and national pride. This was more than a kung fu movie. It was a message of spiritual revival. The Shaolin monks symbolized discipline, wisdom, and moral strength. The storyline, about loyalty and resistance against corruption, connected deeply with the audience who had just lived through years of ideological control. People saw themselves in those monks, oppressed but unbroken. Behind the scenes, it wasn't easy. The production team faced countless restrictions. The filmmakers had to negotiate with local officials, Buddhist leaders, and military authorities to get permission for every scene. Jet Li and the other actors were monitored closely. Even the fight choreography was reviewed for political appropriateness. Yet, despite all the limitations, the team pushed forward, determined to make something honest and powerful. When the film was finally released in 1982, it wasn't just a movie premiere. It was an emotional release for an entire nation. Theaters were packed, audiences cried, cheered, and lined up for hours to see it again. It became one of the first Chinese blockbusters of the post-revolution era, earning over 100 million yuan, an unheard-of figure at the time. It didn't just signal Jet Li's rise, it symbolized China's cultural comeback. And, in a poetic way, the story of the temple rising from destruction mirrored the country's own journey of rebuilding from the ashes. Number 7. Jet Li's co-stars were real martial artists, not actors. One of the secrets behind Shaolin Temple's intense realism was its casting. The majority of the cast weren't trained actors. They were actual martial artists, monks, and athletes. The director wanted to capture the purity of real movement and discipline. So, instead of hiring famous names, he went straight to Wushu schools and military academies to find the performers. This meant that many of Jet Li's co-stars could fight almost as well as he could. The battle scenes weren't just choreographed. They were genuine displays of skill and control. You can see it in their stances, in the precision of their strikes, in the synchronization of mass fight sequences. Every performer brought years of training into every motion. But there was a price for that authenticity. Because most of the cast weren't used to acting, shooting emotional scenes took endless retakes. Dialogue had to be coached line by line. Jet Li himself later admitted that he struggled to balance his physical mastery with acting emotions on camera. "I could fight like a warrior," he once said, "but I didn't know how to cry like one." Still, the director believed that real martial spirit was more important than perfect line delivery. The rawness worked. It made the movie feel more grounded, more ancient, more real. You weren't watching actors pretending to be monks. You were watching men who lived and breathed martial discipline. Some of those co-stars later followed Jet Li into the film industry, while others returned to teaching martial arts. But for that brief moment in 1982, they stood together as the embodiment of a living tradition. Real Shaolin warriors captured on film. And audiences noticed. The fight choreography stunned viewers around the world because it didn't rely on wire tricks or cinematic illusions. It was physical poetry, raw and powerful, born from sweat and discipline rather than Hollywood effects. This decision, to cast real fighters, became one of the film's greatest strengths, setting it apart from every martial arts movie before it. It also influenced a generation of filmmakers who started valuing authenticity over spectacle. By combining real monks, real athletes, and a real temple, Shaolin Temple blurred the line between cinema and reality. It wasn't just filmed history, it felt like history. Number 6. It sparked a worldwide kung fu craze and revived Wushu culture. When Shaolin Temple hit theaters in 1982, no one, not even Jet Li himself, expected what would follow. The movie didn't just succeed, it exploded. Within months, it was being shown in every major city in China, and soon after, in Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, and even the United States. Lines wrapped around the block. In some rural towns, people walked for miles just to catch a screening. For many, it was their first time seeing a Chinese martial arts film made entirely in mainland China. And it wasn't just entertainment. It was an awakening. Suddenly, Wushu schools across the country were overwhelmed with new students. Parents wanted their children to learn Shaolin Kung Fu after seeing Jet Li use graceful yet powerful style. Between 1982 and 1985, enrollment in martial arts academies across China multiplied several times over. In fact, local officials credited the movie for reviving interest in traditional Chinese culture after years of suppression. The phenomenon spread far beyond Asia. In the U.S., Jet Li became an underground hero among martial arts fans who had grown up on Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. American magazines like Black Belt started running articles about the Shaolin Temple and its history, introducing Western readers to terms like Chan Buddhism and Wushu for the first time. Even Hollywood took notice. Producers and fight choreographers began studying Shaolin Temple for its authenticity. It influenced countless future films, from The Last Emperor to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Jet Li, meanwhile, became an international icon almost overnight. But the real legacy wasn't just cinematic. The movie turned the actual Shaolin Temple into a global tourist destination. Before 1982, it received maybe a few hundred visitors a year. After the movie's release, it welcomed thousands daily. Monks who once trained in silence were now performing martial arts demonstrations for international audiences. This unexpected cultural ripple forever changed how the world viewed Chinese martial arts, not as an ancient curiosity, but as a living art form that embodied discipline, philosophy, and strength. And it all started with a film made on a shoestring budget in the dusty mountains of Henan, led by an 18-year-old kid who had never acted before. Number 5. Jet Li suffered brutal injuries during filming. Behind all those perfect fight sequences and stunning moves lies a painful truth. Jet Li's body was pushed to its absolute limits. Filming Shaolin Temple was grueling from start to finish. There were no safety harnesses, no stunt doubles, no modern film equipment, just raw athleticism and courage. Jet Li performed nearly all of his stunts himself, even when it meant risking serious injury. During one scene where he jumps from a high wall to evade an attack, he landed awkwardly and tore a ligament in his knee. But instead of halting production, he simply wrapped it up and kept filming. The crew couldn't afford to delay. Every day cost too much money and resources were scarce. Another time, Jet Li was struck by a staff during a group fight scene. The blow fractured part of his hand, and the swelling was so severe that he could barely hold his weapon. But if you watch closely, you'll notice how he subtly switches grips mid-scene, masking the injury with flawless technique. Even the freezing climate was dangerous. The cast trained barefoot on cold stone floors, sometimes slipping on frost during morning rehearsals. Jet Li later joked that he learned pain tolerance before he learned acting. But perhaps the toughest challenge wasn't physical. It was emotional. Jet Li was a teenager far from home, working in an isolated location with little comfort and constant pressure. There were no hotels, no proper meals, and often no heating in the dormitories. He later recalled nights when he lay awake, sore and exhausted, wondering if he could even finish the film. And yet, all that hardship gave Shaolin Temple its realism. Every grimace, every grunt, every slow recovery after a hit, those weren't performances. They were real reactions to real pain. It's what made the movie stand out from glossy Hong Kong productions of the time. Jet Li's endurance became part of his myth. After the film's success, people began calling him the real Shaolin disciple, not just because of his skill, but because of his spirit, the willingness to suffer for perfection. By the time shooting wrapped, Jet Li's body was covered in scars, but his name was destined for immortality. Shaolin Temple had transformed him from an athlete into a cultural hero, and from that moment on, every martial arts movie he made carried the same essence: discipline, sacrifice, and heart. Number 4. The film's storyline reflected ancient legends and modern politics. At first glance, Shaolin Temple seems like a simple martial arts story. A young man seeks refuge in a monastery, trains under the monks, and ultimately uses his skills to fight against tyranny. But beneath the surface, the script was carefully crafted to reflect both ancient legend and subtle political symbolism. The movie's protagonist, played by Jet Li, is based loosely on historical figures and ancient Shaolin folklore. The monks were portrayed as protectors of justice, using martial arts not for aggression, but for moral defense. This mirrored Buddhist philosophy, where physical training and spiritual discipline coexist. Yet, in the political atmosphere of early 1980s China, that story took on deeper meaning. After decades of ideological control, people saw the film as a metaphor for freedom, resilience, and moral awakening. The corrupt warlord in the movie represented oppression, while the Shaolin disciples symbolized unity and courage. For many viewers, it wasn't just about monks fighting soldiers. It was about the human spirit standing up to authority. Director Chang Xin-yen walked a fine line, embedding layers of meaning that passed censors but still resonated with audiences. Jet Li's character's journey, from impulsive youth to enlightened warrior, wasn't just personal growth. It reflected the journey of an entire nation trying to rediscover its moral center after years of chaos. Even the temple's destruction scene carried emotional weight. When the invading army sets fire to the Shaolin Temple, many viewers saw it as symbolic of cultural destruction and the need for rebirth. The ending, where the surviving monks rebuild their temple and their faith, echoed China's own attempt to rebuild its identity. That's why Shaolin Temple was so much more than a martial arts flick. It spoke to people's hearts. It gave them a sense of hope, that even after the darkest times, moral strength could rise again. And it did all this while never once saying it outright. The brilliance lay in its restraint. Number 3. It launched a trilogy and Jet Li's cinematic empire. Few people realize that Shaolin Temple, 1982, was just the beginning of a saga. Its success was so massive that 2 sequels followed: Kids from Shaolin, 1984, and Martial Arts of Shaolin, 1986. All 3 starred Jet Li, making him one of the first mainland actors to headline a consistent martial arts franchise. Each film built on the previous one, both in scale and artistry. Kids from Shaolin added humor and family dynamics, showing a softer side of Jet Li's screen persona. Martial Arts of Shaolin went even bigger, featuring massive group choreography scenes that involved hundreds of fighters moving in perfect unison, still considered some of the most technically ambitious martial arts sequences ever filmed. The trilogy's success established Jet Li as the new global face of Chinese kung fu. If Bruce Lee was the icon of raw power and rebellion, Jet Li became the symbol of grace and philosophy. His performances combined speed, control, and inner calm, redefining what martial arts cinema could be. Hollywood took notice. By the early 1990s, Jet Li had crossed over into international cinema with films like Once Upon a Time in China, and eventually Lethal Weapon 4 in the U.S., where his villainous role introduced him to Western audiences. But he never forgot where it started. In interviews, Jet Li often refers to Shaolin Temple as the movie that gave me my life. Even today, fans revisit the trilogy as a snapshot of authentic martial arts filmmaking, before wires, CGI, or digital doubles became common. The fight scenes were raw, human, and breathtakingly precise. Every jump, flip, and strike was powered by real training, not special effects. Culturally, the Shaolin Temple trilogy also opened doors for future stars. Without it, there might not have been Donnie Yen, Wu Jing, or Tony Jaa following in Jet Li's footsteps. It reignited pride in Asian martial arts cinema, proving that discipline and tradition could be just as thrilling as Hollywood spectacle. In a sense, Shaolin Temple didn't just make Jet Li a star, it made martial arts cinema a global language. By the mid-1980s, Jet Li wasn't just a national hero. He was an ambassador of Chinese culture, carrying the Shaolin spirit to the world stage. But behind all the fame and legacy lay something deeper: the personal transformation of a young man who started with nothing but discipline and turned it into destiny. Number 2. The movie transformed Jet Li from athlete to philosopher. When Jet Li first stepped onto the set of Shaolin Temple, he was a national athlete, strong, disciplined, and technically perfect, but not yet the thoughtful figure he would later become. The film changed that. Surrounded by real monks, Buddhist rituals, and the deep silence of the temple grounds, Jet Li began absorbing more than just choreography. He absorbed philosophy. He often spoke about how filming in the temple changed the way he viewed martial arts. "Before this movie, I only saw kung fu as a sport," he once said. "After it, I saw it as a way of life." The daily routines at Shaolin, early morning meditation, mindful eating, humility before the master, taught him that strength without compassion was meaningless. That transformation shows up even on screen. You can see the evolution in his character, eyes, the fiery young rebel who slowly becomes calm, focused, almost serene. That wasn't just acting. It was Jet Li's real inner shift taking place in real time. After Shaolin Temple, he began studying Buddhist teachings more deeply and often used his fame to promote peace and discipline rather than violence. Decades later, when he founded the One Foundation, a charity focusing on disaster relief and education, he credited that moment in Shaolin as the origin of his worldview. Interestingly, this balance between warrior and philosopher became Jet Li's trademark in cinema. Unlike other martial arts icons who emphasized aggression or rebellion, Jet Li projected humility and inner strength. He made kung fu feel not like destruction, but enlightenment. That's why Shaolin Temple isn't just an action movie, it's a spiritual journey on film. It turned Jet Li from a fighter into a thinker, from a performer into a messenger. The young man who once fought for gold medals became the man who later fought for compassion. And that journey began inside those ancient temple walls. The Quan. It became the most influential martial arts film of its generation. If Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon introduced kung fu to the West, Shaolin Temple redefined it for the modern East. The movie didn't just break records, it built an empire. It inspired over 100 Shaolin-themed films in the years that followed, turning the temple itself into a cinematic universe long before Hollywood coined the term. But its impact went beyond the screen. It revived tourism, rebuilt an entire religious order, and reshaped China's image abroad. It also set the stage for the international martial arts film market that flourished through the 1980s and 1990s. Directors from around the world, from Hong Kong to Hollywood, began referencing Shaolin Temple as a benchmark for authenticity. Even animation studios like those behind Kung Fu Panda later cited its influence. What made it timeless was its honesty. There was no glamour, no gloss, just the real beauty of discipline, loyalty, and endurance. Every viewer, whether they were in Beijing, New York, or Bangkok, could feel the same universal truth. Greatness isn't born, it's trained. And for Jet Li, that message defined his entire career. Without Shaolin Temple, there would be no Once Upon a Time in China, no hero, no fearless. It was the spark that lit everything else. Today, more than 40 years later, people still travel to Henan just to stand where the movie was filmed, to walk those temple steps, feel that ancient wind, and remember where it all began. For millions, Shaolin Temple isn't just a film, it's a living legend. Conclusion, plus. CTA, Jet Li's 1982 Shaolin Temple was more than a breakout performance. It was a movement. It revived a temple, reignited a culture, and transformed a teenager into a global icon. Every punch, every kick, and every silent moment carried the heartbeat of a civilization rediscovering its soul. So, next time you watch it, look beyond the action. See the discipline, the devotion, the message that strength without virtue is nothing. Because Shaolin Temple wasn't just made to entertain, it was made to awaken. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and share to help more people discover the untold stories behind Jet Li's legendary debut. Subscribe for more deep dives into iconic films that changed the world. Join our channel for exclusive behind-the-scenes insights, and if you'd like to support our work directly, hit Super Thanks. Every contribution keeps this channel alive and growing. See you in the next story of cinematic history.